Hello, thank you for joining us. Would you please tell us your name and your current position with the library?
Yeah, I'm Steve Mayhugh. I am the current Facilities Director for the MidPointe Library System.
How long have you held this position, and how long have you been with the library?
This is my 5th year in this position, and I've been with the library since 1996, so 28 years.
Okay, could you tell us about the roles and responsibilities of your current position?
My current position is a new position that was created, 5 years ago. Basically, what I do is oversee all of the facilities, the maintenance, repair work, work with new construction, renovations, things like that. Just general maintenance of the library facilities, making sure that nothing falls apart and that we can keep the libraries open without having to close them. And also, we've got some older buildings in the system, keeping those functional as long as we can. So.
What is your day-to-day like?
It varies. A happy day is when I get here in the morning and I pay bills and I send folks out to handle regular maintenance things. But, we could get a call at 2 in the morning that there's a pipe burst somewhere. I've been up on the roof at Middletown at midnight working with air conditioning repair people. We had a call from the fire department here in Westchester earlier this year because there was an apartment fire nearby and they needed to use the library as a Red Cross station. So was out here at 5 in the morning to meet the Red Cross. It can be anything. Some days are calm and cool and collected. Other days can be pure chaos. But my point here is to try to reduce the chaos, coordinate things, and keep the library up and open.
Now, you mentioned working at both Westchester and Middletown. Do you work at all the branches or just those two? At
all the branches. So I oversee the facilities, maintenance and care at all the buildings in the system.
What do you find most rewarding about the position?
Most rewarding is actually seeing things get fixed. If there's a tragedy, seeing it brought to its positive conclusion, but also making sure the buildings function for as long as they can. Because one of the things I've done is try to be proactive and replace parts of buildings that could fail on us. So at Middletown, for example, I've replaced all of the HVAC piping over the past few years, replaced the chiller. We're planning to replace our air handling units at Middletown here in the next year if we can. Things like that to keep us up and running, and so that years down the road, once I'm retired, people won't have to worry about it.
What do you find most challenging about the position?
Most challenging? Costs. Costs keep going up. So costs for repairs, costs for parts. At our Middletown branch, it's an old building, so there's always failures somewhere in it. So it's a constant challenge. There are days I'm just kind of in the morning beating my head with a book because, we've got another problem in the Middletown building. But, it's 40 plus years old. So it's kind of what you expect. And we hope to have it around at least 30 or 40 more if we can.
What is an accomplishment or project you are particularly proud of in this position?
In this position? Probably our repiping project for HVAC. We basically gutted the entire mechanical room of its pipes and replaced them with new ones. Also got rid of moved some of the ductwork around so we could put the pipes below the ductwork. Nobody who doesn't work in facilities will understand what I'm meaning or why this is a joyous thing. But for people that have to repair the pipes, it means you don't have to climb over a duct or cut a duct out to replace it. So facilities folks know what I'm talking about.
What is one of the biggest challenges moving forward? You mentioned some of them, but is there one that sticks out? Moving
forward, it's always going to be, having the funds to accomplish some of these projects. As a government agency, money is, never flowing in by the truckload for us. So we have to always be aware of what our expenses are, what our income is, and whether we can achieve some of our goals under the current funding situation. So, and like I had mentioned, with prices going up, it's, we've been kind of tight sometimes.
Now, are you involved in the Liberty project at all?
Yes, yeah, I'm part of the design team there, and construction team. So we've been working on this as far as actual physical work is concerned, for about 2 years now. We bought property there on Yankee Road 3 years ago, started doing demolition in the summer or spring, actually, of 2022. So on that property there was a house, a barn, and a small shed, plus a little wooded area, and so we had to demo the house, barns, trees, everything like that, and got that out of the way. And then there was a slight delay in 2023 with the project because there was a glass shortage in the country, and so none of our construction companies that were trying to bid for the project could get any glass quotes because there was no glass available. So then, we moved into 2024. Everything has worked, and we're looking at wrapping up the project here in the spring of 25.
What other positions have you held at the library?
Prior to this, I was the branch manager here at the Westchester Library for 23 years. So from 1996 to spring of 2019.
What were your roles and responsibilities in that position?
Back in those days, managers were kind of like, in a way, we were kind of the kings of the castle, if you want to say. We were responsible for pretty much everything that went on in our branches. So in addition to making sure we had enough staffing, making sure that the building worked, we were also in charge of facilities. We didn't have any kind of janitorial staff. We had janitors, but no maintenance staff. So branch managers in those days were also responsible for maintenance work. And that's kind of how I worked my way into facilities, because I had to learn how to do HVAC, plumbing, all that as a branch manager. So, that's a lot of my experience came from that. Also, public relations. When I first started here at Westchester, we were a small library out there on Cox Road. We were circulating about 300,000 items a year. One of the things I did that I think helped increase our circulation was by hitting the streets all the time. I mean, I attended Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, Kiwanis, all those kind of events, met regularly with members of the Westchester administration, and I just basically got our name out there and, talked to school principals, superintendents, all that, and just kept pumping up the library. And by the time I left in the late 20-teens, our circulation was about 1.2 million a year out of this branch. So, of course, it's not me doing it, but it's just, there are other factors involved. But I think part of what made us as important in the township as we are is the fact that I actually went out and promoted us and got to know people and made a lot of connections.
So what was your day-to-day like as a branch manager?
Day-to-day here as a branch manager was definitely different from being a facilities director. So it was a little bit more calm in the sense that there were not things falling apart or exploding. But still, you could have a busy day as a branch manager too. And as the branch managers nowadays will tell you, it's always hopping, but it was different. I would get in the mornings. Of course, we'd always have to make sure we had staffing available. I would order books. I would handle any kind of maintenance issues that we had in the building, because back in those days, we didn't have a facilities department. We didn't have maintenance technicians. So the branch managers were the people who actually handled the maintenance at their branches. And we only actually had 3 branches in those days too. So it was basically the manager at Middletown and the manager here at Westchester and at Trenton that would kind of oversee maintenance for their facilities. And then, of course, there was always getting out and meeting the public and meeting people in the area. A lot of public relations work. In a way, a branch manager in many ways is like a director in the sense that we're responsible for public relations for our branch and making the library known in our community. So I did a lot of that. I would help out when needed at the desk or checking in books and back, multiple things like that. So,
what would you say? What would you say is the biggest difference from when you started as a branch manager to when you ended as a branch manager?
Back when I started as a branch manager in here at MidPointe, wow. Well, a lot of things. We were kind of a small mom and pop library system back in the day in the 90s. Butler County was not as populous as it is now. And it was a different feeling altogether. Not bad, but just we had a lot of growing up to do, which we did over those years. Additionally, when I first started, we didn't really have the internet. There were no computers. In fact, here's a library story for everyone to enjoy or not. The library was a very small town organization at that time, and a lot of library staff were all related to each other. So, we had moms and sons, and various family members working in the library system. This relates to my life because we didn't have really the internet when I first got here. So shortly after I arrived, Governor Voinovich showed up because we got internet terminals. And this was 1996. We got internet terminals so everybody could use the internet for what it was those days. And I'm talking to Governor Voinovich, and as he moves away, I see this really, attractive woman working at the circulation desk. And I look there, and she looks at me, and I'm like, wow, who is that? And a few minutes later, her mother, who also worked at the library, comes up and introduces herself to me and says, hi, I'm, Karen, and, nice to meet you. And that's my daughter there. Did you want to meet her? I'm like, yes, I do. And so, 27 years later, we've been married, and that's our library romance story. Although there's others. I mean, we've had library staff marry some of our police officers and things like that. So Governor Voinovich came in, celebrated with us, and this new and amazingly wonderful thing called the internet that most people didn't know how to use yet or what it was. And now everybody else brings their computers into the library. We don't need to provide those. But at the time, people didn't really have home computers. So we were the source for internet. Also, as I had mentioned, branch managers used to order the books. So there were about four of us that would regularly get together, order books for our branches, and also share ideas. So we had a fairly diverse collection in those days, depending on where your branch was. We would kind of decide what's best for our community, things like that. Or, again, we're librarians, so if there's a subject that interests us, of course, we would buy books in that area too, but usually we'd make sure it's an area of interest for our community as well. We weren't open on Sundays in those days, and that was a bone of contention back in around 2003, I think it was, when we, mentioned to staff that they'd have to come in on Sundays to at least do the book drop. And there was an uproar, of course, this is horrible, a nightmare making us come in on Sundays. But here we are, people come in on Sundays now, and it's, the modern world. And, oh boy, the list could go on and on and on of the way things have changed in the past 30 years. But
what did you find most rewarding about being the branch manager or about the position?
Most rewarding was probably seeing that library branch grow into what it is now. When I first started, it was a small building, 14,000 square feet. It had actually, prior to my coming here, been only a 7,000 square foot building. I can actually, if you want, give the history of the Westchester Library here. So originally, our first branch here in Westchester was built in 1967, and it was actually in the cistern in the basement of Hopewell Elementary School here. So it was, not much to write home about, but it was a public library for the people in the Westchester area. And sometime after that, in the mid to late 70s, we moved to I believe maybe 74, not quite sure. But we moved to a new location on Route 42 in Pisgah. It was an office building owned by Dave Graham, a resident here of Westchester. And our branch was there until 1983 when we opened up the Cox Road branch. When Cox Road opened up in 1983, it was only a 7,000 square foot building. Around 1987 or so, it was doubled in size to just under 14,000 square feet. And when I was the manager there then, I oversaw a couple further additions. We added 800 square feet to our children's department. We created a new book drop office that was another 600, 700 square feet, and a reference office also that was another 500 square feet or so. But it was an interesting library, the old Cox Road Library, because if we want to look at our staff amenities, here at the modern Westchester Library, we've got a break room with a kitchen and all that. At the Westchester branch, we had a break room with microwaves. I can't remember if we had a stove or not. We had a fridge, but the book drop was also in the break room, which, means that there were constantly books clunking in. In winter, when it was 20 below zero, everybody had to sit in the break room with their parkas on. There was also a restroom in the break room, which we won't go any further into detail on. But, there was a lot of unpleasant times for folks in that break room. It was kind of like being in a submarine, really, because the building was so small. We only had about 5 or 6 staff desks. And so, as soon as somebody would clear out of a desk, a chair, someone else would be in it to do their work. So it was really tight, really kind of cramped. And the building was dark. It was kind of dark and gloomy in there. But people liked it. I mean, it served its purpose. But when we moved out of there, I, for one, was really happy to leave. I know there were a lot of people that weren't, but we were at that point circulating well over 1 million books a year out of a tiny little building like that, and it was really becoming unmanageable. Just the amount of people in the building all the time and the amount of books going in and out, we really needed more space. And so when we opened up this building in 2009, it really was a big improvement.
Back to your position as branch manager, what did you find most challenging?
Most challenging was probably dealing with the amount of volume of work that we had to do in such a small building. That was our biggest problem. Was that? I mean, that was the most challenging problem right there. Getting as much done as we did with no space to do it, we were constantly had a demand for new books and things like that. We didn't have the shelf space for it. We didn't have parking space. So, it was nice when it opened up in 83, but by the time the 90s rolled around, mid-90s, it was obsolete already. The size of the building was probably our biggest challenge at the time. With others, it was just a challenge to make customers in the area aware that they had a library system here. And that's one of the reasons I had mentioned that as a branch manager, you had to get out, hit the streets, and make people aware of the fact that you existed. A lot of people I would talk to, and they would say, well, I don't even know we had a library here in Westchester. It's like, yep, you sure do. It's here on Cox Road. And then, of course, there were the facilities issues. The Cox Road building had a fairly substandard HVAC system. We just had little residential units around it, and they were always breaking down. By the time I got there, they were, going on 13, 14 years old, and so we were constantly having to make repairs like that. We expanded the parking lot because it was too small, so we doubled the size of the parking lot. Little challenges like that. I mean, it was our major challenges at Westchester were primarily due to the size of the building and the property we're on.
What can you tell us about the MidPointe Westchester at 9363 Centerpoint Drive, the new building?
Right. So this building here, we opened up in November of 2009. And whereas the old building was about 15,000 square feet, this one is just under 50,000 square feet. So we had a lot more space, and we were able to get a much larger collection in. We also were able to provide a huge community room. So we have our community room at the opposite of the customer service desk there is well over, it's probably somewhere 1,500 square feet maybe. It's a pretty good sized community room that we can divide up into 2 or 3 if we need to rooms. But we were able to accommodate a lot more programming. We have about 5 or 6 study rooms here behind me, which allowed people to actually have meeting spaces and study spaces, which we didn't have at the old Cox Road building. So we opened this in 2009, and it was right around the time that the economy crashed, the Great Recession of 2008 or whatever. So we got the building opened. On our first day, actually, we had closed the library. Westchester Library had been closed since around the beginning of October because we were transferring books and things from the old branch here. Our opening day was a blast. We had, I'd say, 1,000 people here to visit the library during the event. The State Librarian of Ohio was here. But at the end of the day, people were able to drop off all of the books that had been stored up for a month. And by the end of the evening, there was a crew of myself, I think Kathy Stengel from HR, of Westchester staff, Judy Girton, who was the assistant to the director at that time, We were here till probably 10 or 11 in the evening, and we had 14,000 items that we had checked in about 5-6 hours, whatever it was from, the time we started opening up the book drops. And so there's actually a photo of me somewhere lying on the top of this about 5-6 foot pile of books that were all stacked up in front of the book drops. But we didn't have an AMH then either. So nowadays, an AMH, for people that don't know, is an automatic handling system where you put your books on a conveyor and they're automatically checked in. Back then on this date, it was just a bunch of us checking items in, on desktop scanners. So it was quite a task. But from the get-go, this building had a lot of support in the community, and the number of users that we had kind of skyrocketed then too. We were able to provide concerts back in the day. We had blues concerts here, jazz concerts, things we couldn't have done in a small venue like the old Cox Road building. 15 years later, this building actually still functions very well. We have very little maintenance problems with this building. So it's one of the things I've been most pleased about in my time here is getting this building completed, and the fact that it is such a good, well-constructed building, and it gave us opportunities to do a lot more work for the public.
Were you involved in the design and building process for that branch?
Yes. Yeah, I was involved with that. We started work on that. The actual physical work, we probably started in 2007, 2008. I remember our core group of people working on it were Doug Bean, Judy Girton, Kathy Stengel, and myself, plus Judy Boyko from the township, and their public services director. And so we were pretty much the construction team here. And we spent a good year or so working to get a design created, and then started construction in 2008. We finished in 2009. When we first started working on this building, as you can see behind me, you can't see behind me, there's columns here in the building that look like, a Greek temple. And so before we actually got the walls up on the building, it actually looked like something out of ancient Athens, just with all these concrete pillars, columns sticking up like that. So it was kind of cool in that sense.
How does that process compare to the building of the Liberty branch?
The building of the Liberty branch, it's actually not that much different. We've got a construction team, although this time around, the township wasn't involved in the construction. Westchester was involved in construction here because this is their building. They own it. This building was funded through TIF monies, a type of tax, and it was managed by the township. And so this is their property, and they actually own the building. So that's why they were involved here. In Liberty, we purchased the land and are constructing the building out of our own with our own funds. So this has basically been a job with our architects and with library staff in designing the building. So that's probably the major difference. And the Liberty building is not going to be as large as the Westchester. Westchester is just under 50. Liberty will be about 21,000 square feet. So it's a slightly smaller library. It'll be probably the third largest building in our system then.
You mentioned a few times taxes and whatnot and funding the library. Mm-hmm. In 2010, the library first went on the ballot with a 5-year levy. Could you tell us how that experience went?
Well, asking for money is never a fun thing. But prior to that time, we had never had to call for a levy, ask for a levy, because the state funding covered libraries 100%. But when the recession hit in 2008, around that time, the state started to change its funding formulas for libraries, and so we were left with a funding gap because the state reduced the amount of funding we got. So we had no choice, along with every other library in the state, to go out and ask for money. So we did, and it was actually a close race. And that close race, however, led to the change of our library system's name from Middletown to MidPointe. So it's 2010. We're trying to get the idea across that, the Middletown Public Library System, which is our name then, needs money in order to keep your branches open. And I remember standing out on election day talking to people, yes, vote for your Middletown library. And they're like, well, why would I vote for the Middletown library when I've got a library here in Westchester? And I'd be like, no. Westchester is part of the Middletown library. We're a branch. And they'd be like, why? Or Middletown, where's that? And things like that. Because, Westchester, people from Westchester were not heading up to Middletown. I had people literally say, where? So anyway, that's the story there. And so we just barely scraped by, because a lot of people were voting no here in Westchester and Liberty, thinking that they were voting for a library in Middletown. It's like, why am I paying for that? So that led to our name change. Back around 2013, Anita Carroll was the director, and I had been talking about the need to change the name already, because we'd have to go up for a levy again in 2015. And we needed to do something. And I'm sure it wasn't just me bringing that up. I'm sure other folks in the administration as well. But at a certain point then, Anita and I and a new public relations person we had just hired named Carrie Hillman, you owe me lunch, Carrie, joined us. And we met with a public relations firm run by another local Westchester business person named Beth Gully. And so we then started, she had one of her associates also, Dave Eck, who was kind of a writer and branding kind of guy, worked with us, and we went over hundreds of names from, Southeastern Butler County Public Library System, all kinds of odd names. And eventually we just chose MidPointe because it kind of brought together a little bit of, mid for Middletown, point for Center Point Drive here in Westchester. And we kind of, brought those two bits in to create MidPointe. And so at that point, then we could brand ourselves as the MidPointe Library, which is the library system for all of Butler County.
Could you explain how the passage of the levy impacted the library?
Yeah, definitely. Because prior to the passage of the levy, we were basically working, still suffering from the recession. So for most of 2009 and perhaps into 2010, it's been long enough that I can't remember the exact dates, but we actually had to close on Friday. We had to release a lot of staff. We laid off a lot of staff, and we were closed on Fridays. And so, on Friday afternoons, the only person in the building would usually, or Friday all day, the only person in the building would be me and maybe one or two people doing shelving. So the passage of the levy allowed us to rehire more staff, open up on Fridays, and actually extend our hours. So we were able to add more hours, more staff, and of course then provide more resources as well. So it made a huge difference. And I know the public really appreciated it, what we were able to do for them with the passage of that levy.
We're going to wrap up here. Just one or two more questions. I'm going to start off. Do you have any special memories or projects about the library you'd like to share that you haven't already shared?
Oh boy, special memories. There's probably, there's a lot. And one thing I remember is that we always had a lot of fun. One of the reasons why there are people here for 30 and 40 years is because MidPointe actually has been a great place at which to work. I've gotten along. We've had good directors all along. Doug Bean was great. He's the guy that kind of mentored me during my career. When I first got here to MidPointe, I had actually started out working as a department head at UC's library, University of Cincinnati. Moved here. Doug kind of showed me the ropes of public librarianship and all that, so I was able to learn a lot from him. We just always had a good time here. We always had a good time, and that's important. If your workplace is unfriendly, if staff don't feel appreciated, then it's not a good place to work. I know I've always felt appreciated, and I would say the majority of people here have always felt appreciated, and that's why you've got so many old timers here, because it's been a good library system, good place to work.
And I'm going to wrap up with, there's anything else you'd like to add, share?
Well, something I'd just like to add then is, all of us that make up the old guard are going to be retiring in the next few years, and it's the responsibility of people like you, Adam, to keep, that the MidPointe library system working and making it a good place for staff to work at. Not only just for staff, but for our community. A lot of people say libraries are a thing of the past. And I remember working on my master's degree in library science back in the 90s. And people saying, there won't be books here, by 2000, their books will be a thing of the past. Libraries will be gone. Well, wrong. Because libraries, we evolve. And we've been smart. We've been smart in that sense because we have not remained stagnant. Had we remained stagnant, there's a good chance we wouldn't be around anymore if we had just said, okay, we're only about books and nothing else. But as technology's changed, as the needs of society have changed, we've changed with them in order to make sure that our customers, our communities, get what they need. Because there's still a lot of people out there that can't afford a computer, that can't afford to get research materials for their classes, that can't afford a small meeting space for their business, which they can get here. So we've evolved along with the times and with the technology. And I think people of your generation of librarianship now need to make sure we continue to evolve along with society. And if we do that, then our customers will always be able to turn to us when they are in need, and we will always be here to provide that service to them.
Well, thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.